So I have a question about Egghead, and it's interesting to see what the reaction will be of the One Piece audience. As a manga reader, I have basically worked my way through all of Egghead, and I'm currently caught up with the manga. I'm taking some people through the anime right now, and we just got caught up. And while I was able to get them through the first half of Egghead, it hardly wasn't an easy experience, but there were some high points for it. But as we've gotten into the second half of Egghead, there has been a question raised, and is Egghead one of the worst One Piece arcs? Because I know it's not the worst, but there is a question of whether or not it should be considered one of the worst. And I do have some logic to this, because there's a couple of key points of Egghead that I think really let it down in terms of what it wants to be versus what it is. And while I'm aware we're not done with it yet, these are strong factors that are influencing the ability to watch it right now, so they should be talked about. These range from unnecessary changes to the original source material, to aesthetic choices that I don't think service anything at all, to the fact that I think in the original manga, Egghead actually has problems. So let's start with the basic one, which is basically changes made by the anime. Now, normally, changes made in the anime, particularly by Toei, aren't always viewed with the best respect, usually because Toei has a nasty habit of dragging things out, but in Egghead, there's a couple of other considerations. They have actively made decisions to swap important elements, or remove important elements, or add ones in and then downplay them. For one thing, it feels like you can't really go into any One Piece discussion now without hearing people talk about Zoro and Sanji all the time because of how Toei has pitted those two characters. Having Sanji getting tossed around by S-Shark, which didn't happen in the manga, and then having Zoro use his Conqueror's Haki against Rob Lucci, which also didn't happen in the manga. Both of two of the most principal Straw Hats are getting dissed quite badly and in very weird ways. But as if these disses weren't bad enough, it's not like Egghead itself really gives any of the Straw Hats a lot to do, to be fair, but it's worth noting that here they've added some in and taken it away. A good example being the fact that Robin actually gets a cool moment in the manga, which is the fact that she's the one that saves Vegapunk from, which is also Vegapunk, but anyway, she's the one that disarms her and then restrains her, being then ambushed by a Seraphim and then saved by Kaku and Zoro. That is condensed down to a startlingly small segment of the first episode of the new half. And it happens so quickly and so weirdly on screen, it will probably leave you wondering, like some of the people I was watching it with, why is Robin injured? Because if you're not paying especially close attention, you don't know why she's injured or why Chopper is keeping an eye on her. Keep in mind, these aren't manga readers, they're anime watchers. They have to be able to see and hear all of this to understand what's going on. There's also the fact that in the disrespect that was paid to Sanji of having him get tossed around by, S-Shark, they did then decide to have Nami rescue him, which, much to the anger of many people, I'm actually going to go ahead and say I don't have a strong disagreement with. What I do have a disagreement with is that they decided to put it in and then skirted it so much to the side, it's easily missable, which I have a problem with, because if you're going to do something like that, you should commit to it. And there's just a lot of things like that in Egghead where they will alter certain parts or drag out certain parts that just make it feel largely unlikable to watch. But wait, you'll say, what about the sections involving Shanks, Eustace Kid, Law, and Kobe and Garp? And the answer is, what do those have to do with Egghead? You could have picked all of those segments up, put them before Egghead or even after it, and it would have achieved pretty much the same thing with the exception of Shanks' segment, because that has to come before Elbaf. Without it, all of those sections have no direct input on Egghead. None of the moves are made involving Egghead. It's not like the cutout segments in Wano where people are making active moves outside of what's going on in Wano. These segments have no relation to that. A couple happen back in Wano, a couple happen, technically after Egghead proper, so these aren't really connected to the arc. Which brings us down to the fact that I honestly think that Egghead was the arc that maybe Oda bit a little bit too much off with, and he realized he wanted to get onto other things rather than focus on it. Because it is probably the most half-baked arc that we've gotten in a long time in One Piece. I really do think Long Ring is probably the next closest one. It is definitely the worst, but this is a close second. There is next to no characters within Egghead. We have Vegapunk. Yes, there are 6 Vegapunks with different personalities, but it's the same character. They're not really written or expressed in such a way that they are different people. They're just different aspects of the same person. There's Bonnie and Kuma, which is usually the past that is given to this particular arc, and while I do think Bonnie and Kuma's story is fantastic, I don't know if it's justified in this whole mess. Don't get me wrong, I want it in the story. I think it's highly important. I think it relates to a lot of things. It's just not necessarily carrying the entire arc. That leaves us with Kizaru, who I think Kizaru, like a lot of the admirals, is very subjective. You either like an individual admiral or you don't. So I'll leave that up to the viewer. And that really only ties back in with the reveal of what, one of the Gorosei looks like. This is cool, and it's one of the few things that ties around into one of the other segments because it ties into Sabo's segment. But I mean, while I do think it was important to establish the Gorosei, establish their new power, their regeneration, this new magic system that they have, again, I don't think the arc itself is set up enough to justify it. The lack of characters and likable world building helps make this very difficult to get into as an arc. I mean, this is really really seeable because as a non-spoiler for people who are only in the anime, Elbaf seems to go back to a more traditional One Piece format, focusing more on character and the crew themselves rather than on flashy set pieces or just important tidbits of the world. Am I wrong? There's still important world stuff going on, it's just not the only thing going on. And leaving off on a petty but really important note is I think the aesthetic of Egghead sucks. No, I mean, it's hard to say just how much I hate Egghead because it's a visually uninspired setting of what the future would look like. Because it's supposed to look kind of like that retro 80s future, kind of even partially 60s future, but it's not creatively expressed enough to look good in either of those fashions. Like, you got that architecture and some of the clothing designs are kind of supposed to be like the 60s through the 80s, various arcade to, you know, early sci-fi modernism. In principle, I get where that design comes from. It looks awful, especially character costuming for this art. I'm sorry, the dressing for female characters is atrocious. It should have been reconsidered strongly, even by Oda himself, because the man has good design chops, and I'm sorry, that's just the laziest thing he could have gone with for these. And I even hate what they do to the male characters because they don't dress like themselves. He gives Sanji shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. He gives Frankie a full covering uniform but has Nami have her butt hang out. I'm sorry, it is stupid looking. And yeah, I could do a video just talking about how good the fights are, and I certainly probably will as this goes on, and certainly probably coverage of why Kuma's backstory and Bonnie's relationship with him is so fantastic, because it is. But as a whole, Egghead is just kind of a letdown and very annoying to watch for very particular reasons.